The girl examined him closely and realized that this person was very bad. She knew that, among all the subordinates, he was the worst, although incredibly talented when it came to conspiracies. This was the man who had taken the lives of many innocent people. With a frightened voice, the heroine answered that she had seen him. The young man was shocked by her response and was curious to know if she was telling the truth. The little girl continued clinging to her nanny and noted that this man was very bad. Then she added that although he worked well, he was still an awful person and needed to be dismissed as soon as possible. The Duke interrupted, saying that was enough. He didn't want to hear any more of it. Then the man added that the girl was the child of his older sister. However, he still didn't have high expectations of her. In the next moment, he asked if the girl was personally acquainted with the imperial family. He was more interested in whether she truly knew something or was simply speaking thoughtlessly. After that, he asked who exactly had done it, recalling the man the girl had pointed out. Anger surged through him, and he shouted that he only wanted to know who the traitor was. His shouting scared the little girl, and with tears in her eyes, she said she didn't know anything. After all, he was just a frightening and dangerous man. At that moment, she also thought that her uncle was a bad person too. He had promised not to scare her. Then the girl started yelling that she didn't know, repeating it several times. Suddenly, the Duke's subordinate turned to his master and apologized for his boldness, but pointed out that he was the one who had asked the question first. The young man thought that the Duke only wanted to learn a name, and it was the princess who first mentioned a Taita. Without this, it would be impossible to determine if there was a traitor at all. Then he asked his superior if it wasn't the same ability. The man looked at the crying girl and thought that perhaps she was a prophet. A prophet was a rare power that flowed in the bloodline of Willow. Because of this power, they could even glimpse into the future. However, this ability must have a corresponding counterpart. This counterpart is a knight who protects the prophet. At that very moment, the boy continued training, striking his sword against a dummy. He had been doing this for quite a long time and was therefore exhausted. The boy was on a training ground where knights were prepared. After some time, he grew tired and stopped to take a break. Then he noticed someone approaching him. Examining the person, he asked if the teacher had arrived safely. Meanwhile, the Duke stated that prophets could still exist even today. However, the last one appeared about 200 years ago. Also, the knights who protect the prophet are born extraordinarily strong. Still, if they fail to find a prophet, they will be unable to handle their immense power and will go insane. Another possibility is that they will simply die. The man pondered all of this and realized that these were just useless memories. A subordinate turned to the leader and wondered if there had been a misunderstanding. If the princess truly had prophetic abilities, then the man was driving her into a corner. Immediately after that, the Duke intently examined the crying girl, who was sitting with a frightened expression. The little girl sobbed even more under his terrifying gaze. She thought to herself that this was definitely unfair, and wished someone would tell him so. The uncle stated that nothing had been confirmed yet, as there was something he was quite doubtful about. Still, he understood that the whole situation was rather strange. Suddenly, the knights protecting the girl addressed the Duke. One of them apologized for his rudeness, but insisted that the princess was innocent. Several others also voiced their agreement. Because of this, it was impossible to think otherwise. After all, she was just a small child. They added that they had confirmed this over the past 5 days. The man's shock was evident, and he asked if they had all lost their minds together. However, the subordinates pointed out that the girl was crying so bitterly. Meanwhile, a notification appeared in the girl's system, displaying the people who had entered the chat. The chat had 22 participants, including Knights Ted, Mia, Dave, Rotten the Mage, and 16 others. In the chat, Ted wrote that he was completely sure the princess was innocent. Dave believed the Duke was to blame. In Rotten's message, he wrote that the Lord would surely regret this, as none of it mattered. After this, the girl received a system notification stating that she had gained 115 interest points and 55 additional points. The protagonist wondered what all of this meant. Could it be that everyone was supporting her? Soon, the system sent another notification. It stated that in such a short time, the heroine had won the love of her followers. She needed to gain even more love and support. There was also a question. Was it possible for her to receive a reward from God? The girl carefully read the message and understood what she had to do next. Immediately, she started crying loudly and couldn't stop. In her mind, she recalled that in her past life, only Nini had ever taken her side, no matter how much sorrow she endured. The knights watched the crying little girl, and they too felt deeply saddened. Suddenly, a sorceress addressed the Duke, stating that, judging by the circumstances, there had been a misunderstanding. With a stern look, she added that if necessary, she would use magic to uncover the truth. Another mage turned to her and warned Ivana that if she used magic, she would lose all her strength. The young woman immediately shouted at him, declaring that it was not a problem. After all, if she lost consciousness, the man would simply have to carry her. The Duke was slightly shocked by what was happening and just watched the sorcerers argue. The protagonist herself thought that this was all truly unfair. Then she began crying even louder, her wails echoing throughout the area. Sometime later, the little girl was sitting with a pile of sweets in her hands. Her face was completely swollen from all the crying. Beside her sat a nanny who tried to feed her some cake. Near them was Ivana, who had lost consciousness after using magic. In the end, the truth had been revealed. The heroine thought that everyone pitied her because of this, and that her uncle was truly terrible. Now she wondered what kind of strange person he was. After all, even in her past life, he had never shown her any sympathy. The man stood slightly detached, not uttering a single word. However, the knights continued to glare at him intensely, watching his back. The man suddenly turned around and looked at his subordinates. In the heroine's chat, several new messages appeared. Mia thought the princess was poor and cried too much, while the Duke was incredibly cruel. Some knights also wrote that the Duke was at fault. Looking at his subordinates, the uncle realized there was nothing he could do and let out a deep sigh. After that, he understood what he had to do and immediately turned toward the girl. As he approached her, the heroine immediately noticed him. Because of this, she became frightened and wondered what was happening. She was quite curious about what he was planning to do. The main heroine was sure that it was all because of the wounds the Duke had received while subjugating the dragon. She didn't want the man to die, so she tried to help him. The man turned to the little girl and said that he had something to tell her, but she immediately screamed that she was very afraid of the Duke. Her uncle stood with a terrifying appearance, which made the girl scared. Grant immediately addressed the elder. He said that if he continued to look at the princess like that, she would be even more frightened. After all, he was looming over her, making it seem like a threat. The Duke replied that he hadn't even done anything. His subordinate added that perhaps he should reconsider his actions toward the princess. After all, he seemed even bigger in her eyes. The man wondered if he really looked like a threat since his children were nothing like that. Then he looked at the girl who was almost on the verge of tears. Because of this, he got scared again and wondered what he should do. A moment later, he took a small gift box and handed it to the girl, asking her to take it. The heroine's eyes immediately lit up and she looked at him with a questioning expression. The subordinate immediately stated that it was the tastiest fig, and the Duke wanted to give it to the girl. After that, he added that his lord had ordered them to bring the most delicious and popular dishes from the city. The main heroine immediately wondered if this had happened when he used magic. The little girl started drooling at the sight, thinking about how delicious it looked. Her uncle asked if she would eat it since, after all, there was no poison in it. After that, the girl pretended to be thinking about what to answer. Then she stretched out her tiny hands and asked to be given it. With a pitiful expression, she begged to be given the cake. The man immediately handed her the treat. The girl opened the box and continued to examine what was inside. She realized that it was a date. She also remembered that in her past life, she had loved it very much. Immediately, she pounced on the treat, thinking that she couldn't help herself. It was just too delicious. The Duke, seeing this, wondered if children really liked such things. Now he was curious whether he should stock up on an entire cart full of it. The girl was also intrigued and asked if he meant cake and dates. The man confirmed, saying that it was all as an apology to the girl. The little girl was immediately delighted and held out her pinky, asking him to promise. Grant, seeing this, immediately commented on how cute she looked holding out her pinky. The man himself admitted that this was the most insignificant promise he had ever made in his life. The joyful girl immediately shouted to her uncle to hug her. This surprised the man, and he wondered how everything had changed so quickly. Right after that, he even smiled, realizing what had happened. Picking up the girl in his arms, he noted how funny she was. Then he added, "So I have become her uncle again?" The main heroine thought that it was all because he was kind to her. Then she remembered that only she could prevent his death. At that moment, new notifications appeared in the system, showing the people who had entered the chat. Among them was a new participant, Duke Berg. Then came a message from this man asking if she was gaining weight from the desserts. There was also another message in which the Duke thought it might be a good idea to rent out an entire bakery in the next town. The girl read this and wondered, really, the entire bakery? She also remembered that he was already keeping his promise and decided that she should reconcile with her uncle. The man's next thought was that this girl ate 5 times a day. The little girl pondered whether she should take another closer look at the man. After all, everyone who fed her was so kind. It would take 15 days to reach the temple. At that moment, they were on the 8th day of the journey. Despite everything, the main heroine was not bored, but even she herself didn't know why this was the case. One of the knights ran up to her, addressed her as princess, and said that he had a rattle. Suddenly, another knight ran up and scoffed, saying that the first one had such a cheap item. Then he turned to the princess and said that he had something he had crafted himself. But both of them were chased away by a sorceress who shouted at them to stay away from the girl. Then she asked why they were giving such dangerous objects to the princess. After all, she could get hurt. Another mage tried to stop the girl, telling her to stop biting. The knight with the rattle hesitated, wondering if the item wasn't meant for babies after all. The girl realized that since everyone spent so much time with her, she had learned their names. In her mind, she listed them all and recalled that they had all given her gifts. The main heroine noticed that one of the knights was holding a rattle. After that, she smiled and sweetly said that she liked the rattle. The boy who had brought it was deeply touched by this. Then he handed it to the little girl. The heroine remembered that in all 3 of her lives, she had never had a rattle. It had always happened that if there were any, they always went to her older sister. After receiving the gift, the heroine thought that everything was fine and decided to reward the boy with her smile. Then she immediately winked at him. The boy was completely stunned by this action and thought, was she an angel? Then he ran up to a tree and started punching it. In his mind, he swore that he would definitely get married and have a child who looked like an adorable bunny. The heroine, watching this, wondered, why was he hitting the tree? The little girl then saw that other knights had also run up. A female knight said that she had a boomerang. Another claimed to have a knife for self-defense, but he was immediately told to put it away since the princess was still a child. They all wanted the little girl to wink at them too. The sorceress immediately declared that they should stop talking and, turning to the princess, added that she had magic. At that moment, a system notification appeared before the heroine, displaying the people who had entered the chat. The chat had 15 participants, including knights and mages. Knight Ted thought that even if the princess turned into a mosquito, he wouldn't mind giving her his blood. The little girl thought she didn't even want to imagine that. Dave thought that he really didn't want to go on duty because the princess wouldn't be there. Rotten's thoughts were that if his first relationship hadn't ended in separation, he might have had grandchildren, just like the princess. Mia thought that if only the princess could visit their home, her younger brother would be so happy. There were also messages from Avina, who thought about how she had fought with the postal wizard today. She told him that she wanted to send her heart to the princess, but unfortunately they didn't have a box big enough for that. How could that be? After that, there were thoughts about how Avina had heard that the princess was very kind, but that wasn't quite right, because she had settled in her heart. Immediately after all these messages, the system displayed 2 notifications, one for gaining 115 interest points and another for 15 interest points. As the heroine continued reading through these messages, she realized that Avina was the most active. Because of all these actions, she even felt a little scared. The day was quite sunny and the weather outside was beautiful. A pile of gifts that people had given her surrounded the main heroine. At that moment, the knights announced that it was time for their training. As they left, they said goodbye to the little girl, but needed to go quickly. The main heroine knew that they disappeared once a day. This was either for training or attending a meeting. Since the squad was preparing to hunt the dragon Ataita, they didn't neglect their training. This was the only time the heroine could be alone with her nanny, Nini. The girl then started looking through the chat, which had some strange messages. After examining them closely, she thought that this actually looked more like comments. People were expressing their thoughts rather than chatting in real time. Then the girl remembered one of the popular social networks. There, too, people left comments under various videos. The little girl became curious. Could she communicate with them here? If so, when would she be able to? Then the heroine thought that she would like to give them something in return. After that, a new system notification appeared, stating that her interest level had increased from level 1 to level 2. It also said that the streamer rank of Shushu had risen from novice to baron. The system congratulated the main heroine on her rank increase and informed her that she would receive a reward for it. The little girl read this message and wondered what this rank promotion even meant. In her hands, 2 small stars appeared. She wondered, had they been there before? When she had streamed before, there were only silver and gold buttons for ranks. But here, there was a special rank, Baron. Now, the main heroine was curious. Was this something made specifically for this fictional world? She realized that she simply didn't understand what it was and continued investigating. While doing so, she tilted her head upward and tapped at something with her finger. Nanny Nini noticed this and told the princess that it was quite dangerous. Suddenly, the little girl thought that she needed more sugar and wanted to eat some candy. She immediately turned to the nanny and declared that she wanted some sweets. The nanny said that she could only have one piece before dinner, but the heroine immediately agreed to that. At that very moment, a shadowy figure of some kind of monster was lurking in the bushes near the main heroine and her nanny. The woman took out a piece of candy, intending to give it to the child. But suddenly, there was a rustling sound from the bushes, and a leaf fluttered past the little girl. Because of this, she didn't eat the candy, but instead looked at the leaves and the bushes. At that moment, a system notification appeared about the reward for leveling up. But suddenly, the knights noticed a loud explosion in the bushes. A powerful roar echoed through the air, and all the birds immediately flew away. The knights realized that danger was approaching and prepared themselves. Because of the deafening roar, the little girl and the nanny couldn't even move. As a result of all these events, the heroine didn't get to eat her candy. It fell to the ground. A few moments later, the little girl realized that all these sounds were coming from a monster. Everyone immediately looked up and saw a massive wolf-like creature before them. The knights quickly gathered and shouted for everyone to get ready. It was an infected werewolf. Some yelled that they needed to prepare their arrows and attack immediately. As they attempted to do so, they suddenly noticed a silhouette flying past them. It was the Duke. He was already midair, launching a furious attack with his sword, trying to slash the monster apart. In the end, that's exactly what happened. The man effortlessly defeated the beast standing before them. Immediately after that, he approached the monster and grabbed it with his hand. Then, he plunged his hand into the werewolf's chest, seizing its organs. While all the knights were fighting, the nanny and the little girl hid in a carriage that was parked nearby. The nanny held the girl tightly, trying to comfort her. After all, the little one had been frightened by the terrifying monster that had appeared before them. Then, the woman turned to the girl and told her that the knights and wizards were fighting the monster, but she shouldn't be afraid. However, the heroine was on the verge of tears at that moment. Nini hugged the little girl and reassured her that they were safe and that she would definitely thank the knights later.